This is a Momentum Media production.
Welcome to the Smart Property Investment Show, the podcast by investors for investors.
Well, good day everyone. It's Liam Garman here, Managing Editor of Real Estate here at Momentum Media, the team that brings you the Smart Property Investment Show. And this next episode is split over two parts, released today and in 2 days' time, where the team here at Momentum Media, including our director Phil Tarrant and our government relations manager Steve Cooper, we unpack our 5 big predictions for 2025 and the property market. That is coming up in just a second.
Good day, how you going? Phil Tarrant. I am the host, sometimes co-host of the Smart Property Investment Show. Welcome to 2025, wherever you're tuning into this. This might be the second podcast you listen to this year. This is the first podcast in the studio I've recorded for this year, 2025, and getting set for what's going to be. It's good having a bit of a break over the Chrissy period because I haven't had to speak to too many people about property. That said, whenever I entertain and people actually know that I sort of work in and around property, they often think that I know what I'm talking about and therefore ask me questions. So I'm always pretty good at avoiding giving any real interpretation analysis of what's going on or advice, but I'm always happy to offer an opinion. Joining me in the studio, Managing Editor of Real Estate at Momentum, Liam Garman. Welcome to 2025, mate.
Phil, I think you're fibbing a little bit. I don't think there's a week that goes by where you don't talk about property. Even at our Christmas party, you and I are having a bit of a gas bag over property.
Yeah, we were.
It becomes, at what point does the job start, the hobby end, and everything in the middle kind of mesh?
Well, I wouldn't say property is a hobby of mine, and I wouldn't say that I love property. And you speak to most people, probably they go, I just love property. I don't really care too much for property, personally.
Oh, you're a fibber.
I know, you do.
I love it. I can't get enough of it. I read about it in my spare time.
Yeah.
My wife gets angry because we're sitting there, we're watching movies, and I'm just looking at sold prices and trying to build.
But they reckon most people consume real estate media when they're sitting there watching, like, I don't know, what's a show like Married at First Sight or something or other. People sit there and then there's a break. And then you sit there and you scroll on your phone looking at property stories. So
it's because I'm always looking up. Well, I do that because whenever I see it on TV, I start looking at the sold prices in the area. I'm like, okay, trying to build that mental map and looking at where everything's situated around the local train station or this, because it's a great way of understanding where they are. But maybe
I don't like property.
Maybe it's because I'm an addict. I don't know.
You are. I don't know. Yeah. I often, I've spoken about it before on this podcast, I often get sort of a bit of malaise sets in with property with me. I just go, I don't want to talk about property. I don't really care. I'm sick of it. I'll have problems with my portfolio. I go, I'm done with this. I just don't want to deal with this anymore. And then I get my capital growth calculator out and I sort of do compounding 5% compounding growth for a decade. And I go, property's okay.
Yeah, maybe I'll stick around.
Deal with property. I'll stick around. I'll keep at it. But I wanted to, everyone always asks me what's set for 2025, Phil. And again, I preface, and this is by no means a disclaimer, but it is. These are just my views on it. But people always go, what's going on for 2025? So I thought that I would share my 5 predictions for property markets in 2025, and you can give commentary and interpretation around it because you actually probably a lot more hands-on in the property game than I am with the great work you do on smart property investment and also real estate business. But we're going to move into an area which is I'm familiar and comfortable around, but it's not really my skill set, and that is really the government aspects. And I think there's going to be 2 of my points, or 3 of my points here, really 4 of my points, actually all 5 of my points involve a government view to it all. So I've asked someone to come to the studio who can actually give us some good advice and interpretation through the lens of government. That's Steve Cooper. He's the Government Affairs Manager at Momentum Markets. My colleague here. Steve, how you going?
Good, thanks, Phil. How are you?
I'm all right. How's your break? You're a property investor as well?
I am a property investor.
Yes.
Break. We had a break.
Yeah, there was a break.
There was a break?
There was a break, yeah. I spent most of my time in the kitchen, so.
I saw that on your social media.
Yeah.
You're quite active in that. You do a lot of liking of other people's posts.
Yeah.
Mainly politicians.
Yeah.
And I see that quite a lot.
Yeah.
But
I'm still eating turkey 3 weeks after Christmas. So.
What was your best dish served?
It would be my porchetta. So I did a full pork belly porchetta from soup to nuts, as they say.
Wow.
So cut the pork belly open and butterfly it and score it and do the marinade and then tie it and roll it and dry it out and roast it and
good.
Yeah.
It
Turkey
puts me to
wasn't bad.
shame. I went to Steve's house last year, and my wife and I are still talking about it.
Was it that good?
About the
Was
food,
it?
yeah.
Well, I made a trip to Costco, and I still have two full shelves full in my fridge of packaged meat, like some huge cuts of which I've got to. I keep looking at it every day, going, when's the best before day? Okay, I've still got a week before I got to do something.
Did
with
you
some
get
process.
the big the caveman club, which is like the tomahawk, where they basically cut the rib out of
I
the
didn't
cow?
get that, but I got a big fillet. You know, and I also got a massive sirloin, so I can cut all that up, mistakes and cook it. So
Little tip: freeze it just a little bit. Don't freeze it solid to get the consistency the same pretty much all the way through a fillet. Just freeze it just that little bit,
then cut it,
and then cut it,
and then freeze it.
and then freeze it.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah,
So it stops it going all wobbly and
Yeah.
yeah.
So you're not freezing it completely. You're just getting it to the point where it's just starting.
So make
to
it
freeze.
firm, and then
cut it.
Then cut it.
Yep.
And then seal it. I've got the vacuum sealer
Oh, you got
thing.
the cryovac?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so you can half freeze it.
Yep.
Cut it. So half freeze the whole thing.
Yep.
Cut it, then cryopack it,
Yep.
and then freeze.
Freeze it. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and that way you'll get a consistency, thickness of your meat, and you get better value for money that way.
There you go.
An expert.
And here he was talking about politics, but he's giving us giving us meat advice.
Well, he also does know politics. He's a man of many trades.
I am, unfortunately.
So,
My
so you've
sausage
been a
factory-
government staffer, the pointy end, where you're working
I
with
have.
ministers and advising ministers and doing all that good stuff.
The advice is questionable sometimes.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. What is it? And give our listeners a bit of an insight into what it actually is like to work in Parliament House. You meet a lot of politicians. You see the Prime Minister. Is it all pretty relaxed and stuff?
I would say it comes, as with a lot of things, a lot of organisations, the atmosphere really is set from the top, and at a subset of that, it's set from the top within your own office. So if you've got a boss who's very relaxed and is not necessarily one of the team, but is not too fazed by the 24-hour news cycle, the games of gotcha politics, and understands that, these are just the things that happens, and you're actually more likely to provide a better response if you take those things in your stride.
Yeah.
Your staff are more relaxed. The advice that they provide is better, and you get a better outcome for your constituents as well. But at times it can be manic. It's part of the reason I have a nickname of 10 before 10, because I have 10 coffees before 10 o'clock or thereabouts. And it keeps you going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You get hooked to it. And I think I've said to you a couple of times, Phil, that it's kind of like a drug. Once you're addicted to it, you have your moments where you step out and you go through a detox program, and then you come back.
Yeah, I sort of duck in and out of that sort of world, and I obviously do a lot with you, Steve, as your role here at Government Affairs at Momentum. But I enjoy it, but I don't know whether I'd want to be immersed in it full time, but it's nice to duck into it and speak to some pollies and understand what's going on.
It definitely takes a special type of person to be
I do.
immersed in it.
I want to pick up something Steve said, because I've been laughing at it for like 30 seconds. It's like a drug. You detox and then you go back. You're not meant to go back after the detox.
I know. And I know how funny that sounds. But like a lot of people who know me, and we've had this conversation before, it's like mainlining adrenaline, because it's just go, go, go. So for people who constantly need stimulation, of which I'm one of them, it's a fantastic career field to work in, because you can actually see real tangible outcomes for it doesn't matter what level you work in, whether it's local government or state or federal, you can see real tangible outcomes for people. And you do burn the wick at both ends, but it's seeing those tangible outcomes that really makes those long hours and those hard working environments.
So I've never been a government staffer, but my exposure to or relationship with politics is more on the cocktail party circuit, which is probably very different to the reality of being in a ministerial office, sort of doing the doing. Normally I just sit there and drink champagne and talk to people.
And that's equally as important.
And that's equally important, and harder sometimes, because some of the champagne, some of these ministers,
it's rubbish.
Horrible.
Yeah.
And I note the Australian ambassador to the US, Kevin Rudd's copping a lot of flack at the moment with these bills that he's been putting on for entertaining. So I actually saw them because of this slow news at the moment, so everyone's like picking through freedom of information type stuff and whatnot. I went, is that all he's spending on his parties? I thought he should be entertaining more than that personally. But anyway.
I
This
think
is the way
he
it
might
is.
have
So
had
speaking
to-
of champagne,
I think he might have had to wind the spending back after they opened the fancy new embassy in the US in Washington.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, you're on a limited budget there, Kev.
yeah, there we go. But who knows what will happen in the future? But I brought you into this podcast because most of my points, and this may be weighted to maybe the first half of 2025 rather than the second half of 2025, but key themes for 2025. And what I have here is the global economy is going to be so these are the things which will determine and dictate accelerating forces or momentum inside of the property market in Australia, or maybe negative aspects of property in Australia. So to help you make more informed decisions, these is just really an awareness. All of these things you can't do anything about. It's just you can't control any of this stuff, but you need to have situational awareness around it. So what you can do is respond to it and therefore make your decisions. So I'd say global economy would be the first one. Interest rates would be the second one. The third one will be the federal election, which is coming up, and I'll speak to you guys as political flunkies around that. Property taxes would be another one, and I would also say strategic and tactical government intervention. That's more of a state level there. So they're my five things I want to chat about today. So I think we've got a pretty good brains trust here to work through it. We'll just go to a break. When we get back, we're going to get into the global economy back in a moment. Welcome back, Phil Tarrant, host of the Smart Property Investment Show. Welcome to our discussion on prediction of 2025. And as I mentioned beforehand, it's probably the first half of the year because a lot of these things will determine what happens in the second half. And with Lee Garman, Managing Editor of Real Estate, and Steve Cooper, who is the Government Affairs Manager at Momentum, the global economy. So the global economy is a big thing. And it's hard to talk about as a single. There's like going, property markets in Australia. There's myriad property markets in Australia, like there is different aspects of the global economy. But a global economy is largely determined and dictated by the health and the integrity of individual economies and how well they get on with each other to facilitate connectivity and global trade and all this sort of stuff. So in many parts of the world, they're clubbed up together. And you think about the European Union, so they're all in there together, and one nation's economy can largely dictate and determine the effectiveness of other economies. Germany, for example.
We're seeing that play out now.
We're seeing that right now. So you've got, global trade, you've got politics, you've got geopolitics, you've got wars, you've got conflict, you've got this all determines and dictates the global economy, but largely it's dictated and determined by, I would say, the strength and the intent of the global superpowers. And within that, you would put the US, China, Russia, and I would probably group Europe in together, and maybe some of the emerging nations inside of the Pacific, India, for example.
Well, Indonesia's just joined the BRICS.
Yeah, they've just joined the BRICS.
Yeah, and I was reading something today. They were saying that by 2030, 7 of the top 10 largest economies by purchasing power parity will be members of the BRICS.
Yeah, there you go.
Which is, testimony to the ever-changing nature of the global economy and the balance of power. And it's quite interesting seeing that most of the aggregated nations that fit into Europe are dropping out largely through their own mistakes. And those rising nations are the ones that are filling that gap.
Well, rising, your Asian tiger nations, for example, you're going to continue to see the growth of them, probably at the expense of traditional powers in Europe. Europe moving forward will probably largely be influenced as a union rather than an individualized sort of nations who are there sort of, fighting for global dominance. But what does all this mean for Australian property? Well, what goes on globally will dictate and determine investment decisions in Australia, and that will therefore dictate and determine what happens with property markets.
Well, also dictates how much revenue the government has spare to, and opinion. We're talking about this opinion.
The opinion is welcome here. It's a podcast.
This
is the point, right? Like back in the old days of, well, you still do it, right? Written sort of.
My written stuff. It's not as clearly stated opinion when it's opinion, which is what I'm doing now. The government. I think there is no doubt. There is no doubt in my mind that the main driver of inflation and the quote-unquote cost of living crisis in Australia is because the government has been so fiscally irresponsible that they put so much liquidity in the market that is driving increased demand. Like a lot of our inflation at the moment is demand-driven inflation.
I think it's also fair to say that it's, when you say government, it's also state and territory governments.
It's the sum. It's the sum of governments.
Yeah.
It's a sum of governments.
You two, just don't get too political, you two. Just careful.
Well, no, because this ties into interest rates,
it does.
right? Because you've got 4 major banks that have come out with this. You've had the RBA come out with this that says one of the main drivers of the cost of a basket of goods going up is too much government expenditure. And what we've done is we've essentially masked inflation, and everyone's, inflation's dropping, cost of living's dropping, but that's only because we've masked it with energy rebates and a multitude of rebates, which have meant that people's hip pockets have gotten slightly better, but you're paying through it through increased debt. What this does is it puts a really big risk for the Australian economy that if you do have a global downturn and our reliance on, as a banana republic, our reliance on resources to...
Don't pull your punches there, mate.
Relying on resources, revenue...
Can you just explain to some of our listeners what a banana republic is? You throw that term around.
So what I'm using in this term is to say that we are a country which derives its economic windfall from a single source, which is exemplary of an economy which lacks complexity. When you have a complex economy where you're driving tax receipts from a multitude of resources, it means that more or less you are buffered against global headwinds. If there's a global headwind that rocks a steel market, for example, you might not feel it as much if you have your tax receipts split up amongst many different pies. What we have is so much of our tax revenue coming from, say, resources, where, to Steve's point before about BRICS and the global economy comes into it, that if you do have an economic problem emerging in China and you have a decrease in the production of steel in China, for example, we immediately lose tens of billions of dollars in tax revenues, which means that to maintain levels of government spending, you're going to borrow tens of billions of dollars more, which, by the way, is actually going to destroy our currency. Our currency will be more devalued. The AUD versus the USD is its lowest it's been in 2 years. There's a reason for this, which we've got that as a factor, but that also means higher interest rates for longer. That is a worse outcome for property investors and driving supply to help renters, because you need supply. You need investors to drive rents down to help people. It also hurts first home buyers. It is all interconnected. And I think that the government needs to step up and say, well, actually, through fiscal irresponsibility, we're actually making everyone's lives a lot worse off.
Well, we'll talk about interest rates in a moment, Steve. Sorry, mate.
No, you're right. I'm looking at the global economy, and you look at examples of nations that are broadly comparable to Australia in terms of what their traditional economic makeup has been like. And one of the ones that's often cited is the comparison between Australia and Argentina. And when you look at how the two nations, and a lot of people don't know this, broadly comparable in terms of iron ore production, lithium production, beef. Back to the meat conversation. Argentina is slated to overtake Australia as one of the world's largest lithium providers or producers in the next couple of years. And if you look at the way in which the two countries went about their economic development during the 20th century, Australia took a little bit more of a laissez-faire, limited but still some form of regulatory framework, whereas Argentina went down a very strong regulatory-driven framework, which saw a massive blowout in the bureaucratic state, hyperinflation. I think at one point it was at like 320% monthly, like ridiculous levels of inflation. And now what we're seeing is those stories almost flip. We've seen the rapid success and paying down of deficit by the Milei government in Argentina. Now, he's obviously a very controversial character because largely the way in which he acts and portrays himself, he's a big proponent of chainsaw economics, as he likes to call it, which is basically get the state out of it. We've seen, as a result of significant policies that he's brought in, particularly in the real estate space, rents drop. Access
by removing the rental caps.
Yeah. Where investors had no incentive to build or to put existing stock on the market because they weren't going to get a return that translated to being value for money for them. And now, conversely, we're seeing governments here in Australia talk about rental caps. We're seeing a number of political parties talk about that. We're seeing slowdowns in regulatory approval processes that impact first home buyers, that impact investors who are seeking to get into the market. So it's almost been this odd flip.
A lot of Australians wouldn't be comfortable being compared against Argentina.
But I think it's very reasonable.
But and sometimes Australians are, by and large, very apathetic because we are, for the most part, pretty well insulated from or have been historically been very well insulated from the main economic, political and strategic conflagrations of the 20th century. Yeah. So we haven't been forced to grow up, whereas now life's coming at us really fast and we're speed running the 20th century Argentinian experiment, and we're getting to a point where the wall's coming, and when we hit that wall, it's not going to be pretty. So do we look at it and go, hang on, okay, we can see the model we're going down, and it has been progressively going down that over the last 10 or 15 years and has accelerated through COVID for obvious reasons. We saw cutbacks in housing supply, massive amounts of quantitative easing, largely driven by debt, by the Australian government at all levels. Again, not to be casting aspersions on any one particular thing. So do we look at it and go, no, hang on, we've seen where this goes. Let's pull up on the joystick and, get out of it.
Which is why, and I know we're jumping onto point 2 here, but it does show the interconnectedness with interest rate, because there's a lot of debates at the moment that given how much money we're artificially putting into the economy, that we might not necessarily have interest rate cuts on the horizon because it will, for example, devalue our currency yet further. So if we're already at 2-year lows relative to the USD, what that means is the price of goods that we're buying from overseas, which is most goods that we have, will only be more expensive because our dollar relatively is worth less. So that $15, $20 toaster that we're conditioned as a market to buying from Kmart will now suddenly be $30, $40. Inflation, as a result, would then increase yet further. So we are slowly seeing these little breadcrumbs of, well, maybe the Australian economy is not in the position at the moment to necessarily offer interest rate cuts. But then on the flip side, we have the changes to the RBA board. Will the government potentially lean on new appointees to have a rate cut before a next election to win over favour of the voting public before the outcomes of a premature rate cut are really known to investors across the country?
And this is point really 2 and 3, which is interest rates and then the federal election. And there's a lot of discussion around whether or not the government is loading up the RBA board with some favourable people on it to be supportive of, or maybe apply a particular amount of pressure to be supportive of an interest rate cut before the election. But sort of back to this idea of the global economy, and I think you guys, and I guess we're armchair economists at the moment. Australia, to your point, Steve, and you see the government today will come out saying, hey, look at our budget. We're doing really, really well. The reason why an Australian government does well in a budget, it means that they've made more money in tax. Right, it's more of a revenue thing rather than a cost thing, right? Yeah. And the point is that we have a government right now who likes big government and less private sector. So they're loading up, and you see jobs growth and everything which is to do with jobs growth is connected with government spending. Yep. Right. There's
you
not
sent
a lot.
Me I'll try and get it up. The graph of all the new jobs that are being created in like the last 12 months, and it's like almost only in government jobs.
Or government-related sectors.
So where the government is investing is where you're seeing. So it's government spending dough.
Yes.
But government is getting bigger, not smaller. And I think that's back to your Argentinian sort of example. Australia should be driven by a vibrant private sector, and the government largely, yes, it needs to be making the rules and creating the infrastructure for supporting Australia, but we should be looking towards our private sector to be growing and growth, because, you think, to your point, investing in Australia is like investing in a mining town, right? Which you, as a property investor, you don't do. You don't invest somewhere where it's just like, hey, I'm going to go to this mining town because it's really good right now. Yeah. There's stories of people making a lot of money investing in mining towns, and there's probably more stories of people losing more money investing in singular economy. Yeah. Like local things. Australia in some ways is a bit like that.
Yeah, we're kind of like Kununurra or Port
Like
Hedland
Port
or
Hedland, right?
Carnarvon.
Yeah.
Australia is the
national
Port Hedland
scale.
of
the world.
So Australia needs to be more diversified, and we have the opportunity to be a more diversified economy purely because of our geographic location and the fact that in many ways Australia is a safe harbour for growth in Asia, right? You know, it's a good point for us to be. So we are intrinsically connected with the global economy.
And we have seen, sorry to cut you off,
No,
Phil. There's been a growing recognition, and just turn on ABC or Channel 9 or Sky, pick your flavour there, I guess. But there seems to be a recognition or at least an admission of guilt that this cost of living crisis, quote unquote, will be sticking around with us until 2030. And I
don't call it a cost of living crisis. I call it a cost of living. It's just the cost of living. It's a crisis depending on the lens in which you view it.
Yeah.
If this is with us until 2030, I'd say it's completely normalised. So it's just the cost of living, you know. And yes, there is global economy dynamics will shape and influence and persuade exactly how that plays out here. But it's also going to come back to the decision making in government. You know, whether it's around migration policies, whether it's around stimulating. I caught up late last year with the Shadow Treasurer, right? And we're having a discussion, all this sort of stuff, and I went, you never hear the government talking about the SME sector in Australia. You never hear it. There is no attention by the current government placed towards the SME sector. It's all about how do we create bigger government and the supporting apparatuses around the union movement, all that sort of stuff. Where is the attention on the SME sector in Australia, which is the lifeblood of the Australian economy? Let's be clear. I think 70% of all Australians are employed by SMEs. You never hear it spoken about. There is no advocate or ambassador for the SME sector in the current government. They'd rather the SME sector, you know,
vanish,
put it away. Yeah, we know it's there, and there might be some lip service towards it, but there is no dedicated policy towards supporting innovation in the SME sector in Australia, and that's the lifeblood of it.
Yeah, and this is where I come back to the Melee example, which is afuera, get it out, get government out of, stop making the lives of business owners, stop making the lives of
people letting it go.
Yeah.
And this is my point around government intervention, which is the fifth point. But let's go into interest rates. And I think we've sort of covered it. I think interest rates will be a product of all the stuff that we've spoken about. I was saying all through, the latter part of 2024 at least, saying I wouldn't be expecting interest rates soon in 2025. Point number one. Point number two, there is a chance there will be no interest rate cuts in 2025. And a lot of people will go, hang on a second, like, no, I can't believe that.
And what about, it's all very well and good for the RBA to pass an interest rate cut, but there's no guarantee that the banks will pass that on.
There is no guarantee whatsoever.
Because their costs of servicing their own debt, which we know is astronomical, haven't gotten any cheaper because of the value of the Australian dollar.
Right, and I've been telegraphing this, saying just because there's a cut to the official cash rate does not mean that your bank will instantly pass that on. Point number one, there is no expectation around it. Point number two, it's going to be very hard for the governments to apply any pressure on banks to pass on interest rate cuts. You know, they're just going to go, well, it's a cost of funds. You know, I'm sorry, like, you know, it's still costing us this much to service a loan, so we're not passing on interest rate cuts. And a lot of Australians are going to go, why aren't they passing on? We've been promised interest rate cuts. Like, a lot of Australians don't actually understand the relationship between the official cash rate and the interest rate that you have on your mortgage. When interest rates go up, tell you what, banks will pass on real quickly, right? When interest rates are coming down, banks are often, they'll all sit there and just go, who's going to go first, who's going to first? And even if you get a 25 basis points cut, there's a good chance they won't pass on all of it. Even if you get an interest rate cut, you're going to have to fight as a property investor tooth and nail to get that passed on to you. And you may need to refinance in order to do that, because some lenders will use this as a way to gain market share, and therefore you're going to have to get a pretty good mortgage broker to work with you to maybe switch your loan.
Or do your own research.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what I did when I locked, I locked my rates in 2022 for 5 years.
Yeah, there you go. And so you're still on
a fixed rate.
What's your fixed rate? 2 point something?
2 point.
Yeah, God.
5.9, I think,
pretty good.
Thereabouts. Yeah. And I shortened the loan term.
Yeah.
So I halved my loan term, and I was forced to change banks because my banks laughed at me and said, no, not happening.
Really?
Went to another bank and they said, yeah, no worries, sign on the dotted line. You can service it.
So you're just paying off your loan quickly?
P&I, yeah.
Yeah, good.
So by the end of the 5 year, the way I've structured it is that by the end of the 5 year fixed term, I'll have paid 2/3 of my mortgage off for my investment properties.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, good man. smart strategy.
Yeah. And,
You know,
and this,
if you're not trying to keep investing, if you're looking just to pay down debt. you know.
and this comes back to one of the key points that where government should be involved, and that is making sure that Australians are economically and financially literate.
Yeah.
That is one of the major problems. I can't tell you the amount of times that I've been sitting there having dinner and we've been watching, my wife and I have been sitting there watching the news, and it's like, can you explain that to me? And for most people, it's literally Year 9 or Year 10 economics, but people don't take Year 9 or Year 10 economics. And quite often the only form of economics they're taught in Year 9 and 10 is modern monetary theory and Keynesian economics. They're not taught the flip side of that, which is Austrian economics and that free market, very laissez-faire, libertarian style economic system.
Well, the opportunity is to be educated, and property investors, people tuning this, there's no excuse now not to be educated. There's so much information out there. Just be careful what you listen to. Maybe not us. We're just some opinionated armchair.
I mean, you know, you do sit on. Our listeners know I'm a fiend for Instagram reels, and I'm there for hours. Steve already knows that. He gets about 50 reels from me a day.
Yeah, I think
I always send them to him.
You got some from me at 2:30 this morning.
So that I'm like, when did you send those? But there are also a lot of charlatans.
Economic idiots.
There are, and online, and this is why, you know, with podcasts like this, I think we're very good because we prefix it with, this is my opinion, and here's the evidence that made me come to this opinion. Some of the stuff, I'm not going to swear, some of the stuff I see on Instagram with these wannabe influencers out there, this is how I did this is how I do that, and sometimes they got a whiteboard behind them. It's like, that's actually wrong. That's not even correct at all. And you've got people out here that are actually following this financial advice. We don't offer financial advice.
No.
But I mean, some of these people are getting away with absolute murder online.
Do you know what a lot of people dislike about me, because they think I know about property, right? And I don't really. I know enough to be able to talk about it and maybe sort of thread themes together like we're doing right now, right? But they go, where should I invest, Phil? I go, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you where you should invest. I'm not qualified to do that. Most people aren't qualified to do that.
I think a lot of people would also say not throwing aspersions on financial planners and things like that, but a lot of financial
planners don't know where to invest in property. They don't touch property. They go, buy ETFs or buy some trees or something. Buy some government bonds. I'm not beating up financial advisors. There are very good financial advisors out there who do specialise in property, but most don't.
Yeah.
You know, so just be careful. If you're making your investment decisions from Instagram reels, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Listen to the Smart Property Investment Show, because we actually know what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the election. Let's go to another break, though. Stay with us, back in a moment.
At Invictus Australia, we're all about supporting veterans and their families through the power of sport. Whether it's helping veterans stay connected with their local communities, assisting them in their transition to civilian life, or promoting mental and physical well-being, we're here to support them. From grassroots programs to international sporting competitions, Invictus Australia empowers veterans to take on new challenges, stay active and thrive. Join us in building a stronger, more inclusive community through sport, because together we are unconquerable. Visit invictusaustralia.org to find out more.
Welcome back, Phil Tarrant, Smart Property Investment, Liam Garman and Steve Cooper, my colleagues here. Now, we've spoken about the global economy, and a lot of that's going to be orientated towards what happens when President Trump is inaugurated, which
15
is
more days.
15 more days away.
Who's counting?
Oh, no.
Bloody hell.
Yeah.
Yeah, you take your MAGA hat off now. But what we do know about Trump is that he's a deal maker and he gets stuff done. So I think he will come out of the blocks really quickly and enact some of those promises that he positioned himself around when it comes to securing the presidency in America. You know, what's he going to do around global trade and tariffs and all that sort of stuff. I think there might be a carve-out for Australia. I don't know what's going to happen there. But obviously the American relationship with China is going to be determining a lot of things. So all this is happening, right?
I've got a few things I've been thinking about with this, and then I'll throw across to Steve. But, you know, there's been a lot of I think, furor in the media and amongst the commentariat around the impact that
Commentariat.
tariffs... Yeah, the commentariat.
Are we the commentariat?
We're not. No, we're real news.
I think we're the chattering heads, aren't we?
We're the, amongst the commentariat around what tariffs will mean for the economy writ large across the world, but also in Australia. And one thing that I'm not worried. I genuinely am not worried about the impact of tariffs driving up the cost of living, because what I think is coming from the US is a pretty clearly articulated policy where tariffs are being used to achieve a political outcome. That political outcome is pretty clearly stated from the incoming administration, which is we will put on tariffs if you don't stop exporting chemicals that are used in fentanyl to the United States.
Yeah, or
that's actually
steel dumping and things like that.
Yeah, that are very antithetical to the World Trade Organization. If you stop that, then no tariffs. Well, that's actually that's a deal.
That's deal making.
That's a deal.
That's what Trump does. Deals. So everything's conditional.
I don't necessarily buy into the widespread concern that suddenly everything's going to be costing 40% more, because there's actually a solution. And that leads into the second point, which is in terms of, Ukraine or potential conflict in the Indo-Pacific, which is something that has been dominating headlines in Australia for years now, which is, you look at Ukraine, and one thing that you have for tyrants like Putin that aren't performing particularly well, they need an off-ramp. And if you have someone that comes in with the political buy-in, the political mandate to say, hey, give them the off-ramp so we can have peace, so we can get back to normalcy like we were 4 or 5 years ago, there is the mandate to do it. I think the parties will happily buy in. I think Ukraine will buy in. I think Russia will buy in. And I think there will be a reversion to a historical mean in terms of stability.
Yeah.
And I think those aspects will actually see the global economy grow. I'm not sure whether you agree, disagree, Steve.
I do concur in the most part. It is interesting. In the past couple of days, Ukrainian President Zelensky has said that it's only because of Trump that peace is now a viable alternative. Now
You're talking about negotiated settlement.
Negotiated settlement.
You've got to remember, though, Russia holds 30% of the Ukrainian territory. I think a negotiated settlement there will be a very bitter pill for the Ukrainians to swallow.
Yeah, but what's more bitter? The countless hundreds of thousands of young men and young women who are being fed into the
warfare taking
grinder.
place there right now is like...
It's World War I style.
Yeah. It's cold, it's frozen, it's
brutal.
Brutal. It's brutal.
I saw one, I can't remember if I sent it to you. It's born too late to watch German generals conducting an analysis on the Kursk offensive.
Yeah.
Born just in time to watch German generals conducting a detailed analysis on the Kursk offensive. It's like history doesn't
repeating itself.
It's rhyming rather than repeating. But
I think there will be a negotiated settlement there in Ukraine, and I think for the betterment of the wider global economy and the global thing, I think you've got a completely repositioned Middle East. Which will, the Middle East that we knew up until a year or so ago versus the Middle East that we have moving forward is going to be very different. But again, I think you'll get a sense of stability there as well. And I think Trump will do whatever he can to actually facilitate some sort of negotiated settlement there. And I think that will be largely driven around the release of hostages. Once that takes place, I think you're going to get a status quo taking place with a much stronger Israel.
Well, it's funny because it was only 12 months ago where global shipping was completely at a standstill because what was going on in the Red Sea. And I had friends that were moving to Australia or back to Australia from the United Kingdom that had to go the old-fashioned route around
the Horn of Africa.
Yeah, the Horn of Africa around, which just adds weeks and weeks and weeks, which, again, when we're going back to inflation, that's one of your key causes of that cost push, inflation, which is global transport and energy prices, a lot of which will be ameliorated with this normalcy that we could be going back into. So on the flip side, while we're worsening inflation with rampant government spending, on the other hand, a lot of the costs of goods might actually be driven down intrinsically.
We get stability there in the Red Sea with the Houthi rebels getting under control.
Well, that'll be interesting because Israel said that they're now going to
have a crack,
which will be interesting to watch.
But the Houthis don't have backers anymore. That's the thing. Well, I mean, they've got backers. Of course, they've got backers. But in terms of a regional security guarantor,
Iran's been laid low, and it is interesting. I was reading an article.
Iran is worried at the moment because Iran's natural protective umbrella is a result of
partnership with Russia,
but a Syria which was sort of like it or loathe it had some sort of element of central control. But there's a huge vacuum now in Syrian airspace. So
and in southern Lebanon, impacting their ability to get into the Mediterranean.
Israel's approach to Iran was always inhibited by the fact that they didn't have air security over northern parts of Syria because of Syrian service to air defences and stuff, which is largely completely eradicated now. So they are a lot stronger in northern Syrian airspace right now, which has always been where they needed assets in order for refueling its capability should they have a look into Iran. But this is it. This is the interplay of all this. And what does it mean for Australian property? Well, what does it mean for the election, which, Steve, has to happen before May the 17th. May the 17th, and there needs to be at least 6 weeks of a campaign.
Yeah.
So,
and the PM's been out the past week. He's been very, very active to the point around government spending. We saw
justifying it, but
promising more.
$7.2 billion for the Bruce Highway. Now, I'm a big fan of good highways. I think Australia has a significant lack of good highways.
Yeah,
quite happy.
Bruce Highway is
in Queensland.
Yeah,
and
it's right to the top to the bottom.
And Queensland and WA have emerged as key battleground states for the government, particularly because of some of their restrictive regulation and policy making around environmental protections for mining and things like that. So mining is obviously the backbone of the Australian economy.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to go sooner rather than later. And I'm not necessarily – I see it being driven largely by domestic issues. I think we as a nation can look forward to enjoying at least another probably 12 to 18 months of shielding from the broader global impacts of what happens in the Middle East, any negotiated settlement in Ukraine. If anything, it's probably good that they drag that out for us because our grain producers are stepping in to fill the demand that has been vacated by the decline, the drop in Ukraine's.
Well, they say it was the breadbasket of Europe.
Yep. And huge. One of the inflationary points was a lot of fertilizer comes out of Ukraine. A lot of nitrate-driven fertilizer comes out of Ukraine, so that has a flow-on effect for our primary producers. But I think we've got another 18 months, 2 years.
Well, I've said over the latter part of 2024 that the federal election will be fought on a number of different sort of policy positions on both parties, but central to all of them will be housing policy.
Yep.
That will be that. So expect to see a lot of this coming through. And we saw some of the later part of last year, some of the initial sort of views towards how they're going to be packaging stuff up. And my sort of fifth point here is around government intervention, right? Which sort of plays a part in this as well. But the first time the RBA gets together is for an interest rate decision next February. It's month. There's a lot of scuttlebutt around whether or not there's going to be an interest rate cut prior. I think only one bank remains of the position there will be a rate cut in Feb. I think they've all pushed it all back. I'm not up to date on the latest of it. And to the point whether or not the Reserve Bank of Australia is supposed to be completely independent of government decision making, but the wags would have you believe that the government has loaded up the Reserve Bank with friendlies to try and force interest rate things. So the point is that if there is an interest rate decision and there's an interest rate cut prior to the election, would that make any difference whatsoever? Because the point is, don't expect there to be, you're going to see that in your monthly repayment straight away.
Even if the cut comes through, on the back pocket, like $75 a month.
Yeah. But the government thinks that's going to help their cause.
And I think housing will be the primary focus. I think
you're going to say the primary focus. I said it would be a focus. But
I think it'll be the primary focus.
NDIS is the NDIS rorts.
Well, I think it would be the primary focus because housing takes in a multitude of elements. Housing subsumes to a point the immigration debate. Housing subsumes to a point the cost of living debate. It's an amalgam of a lot of very contentious issues, which, I mean, depending on how you cut it up, when you poll people's vote drivers, it could be number one, it could be number two. It's going to be right up there.
Yeah, I think it'll be the mask, and it will be the masking priority for a lot of people that also feeds into the intersection of the immigration conversation that has played out, is playing out in Europe, in France, in Germany, major issue in the UK right now, big election issue for the Trump administration, huge election issue. We've just seen for the Canadian government, we've just seen Prime Minister Trudeau step down on the back of mounting issues as a result of their open doors immigration policy. So I think that will be a key part of it. This is going to be what we call a bread and butter election. It's going to be, how does the economy affect the Australian
people? Which is important because elections in the past, when things are better, inverted commas, a lot of discussion goes around, I would say, more fringe-orientated discussions, and that might be around climate change.
It's the luxury beliefs.
Or it might be around The Voice. And a lot of people say that's not a fringe thing, and I don't want to cause offence by it, but these are stuff in the shades around the core, and that is, how well is Australia doing, how well Australians doing, and a lot of that is intrinsically connected with housing, and that's the reason why what I want to see from whether it's the government or from the opposition is some actually bold, ambitious policies around housing rather than stopgap discussions in the fringes, and by that I would mean the help the buy scheme. That's
only just going to drive inflation even more.
But this ain't. These are small little tactical applications to try and ameliorate an issue affecting a handful, inverted commas, percentage of people. Where are the big, bold, nation-building discussions around housing policy? I said it probably this time last year. I said, how were we able to, and I got stolen this idea because I think I come up with it, how were we able to build a harbour bridge 100 years ago, which was way too big for what we needed at that point in time? It was massive, Where is that logic? Where is that mindset? Where is those ambitious discussions and decisions made around building for 50 or 100 years ahead? We work an election cycle of 3 to 4 years, right?
Yeah. Well, the PM's come out and said he wants to have 4 years terms.
But even then, right? Come on. But it's got to be 4 years. Oh yeah. What I'll do to appease. I know how to fix housing policy. I'll use taxpayers' money to pay off people's HECS debts. That'll help them get into the housing. That'll help first home buyers. Come on. Really? Is that the best? Is that the best we've got?
Yeah.
But the problem is you're going to get this political rhetoric around the fringes, which is going to appeal to different little small subsectors where they think they can buy votes. Hopefully the Greens don't get too much of a voice in determining or dictating.
I don't think they are. They don't seem to be making much cut through.
Well, they've lost their natural constituents, are the sort of
the university students.
Well, you sort of.
I think they got the university. I think they lost the well-meaning silver-haired kind of tree Tories. I think is a good way of putting it. They've lost
this
them.
Question for you, Steve: how do you actually get someone in politics to go, you know what, we're going to do this? It's a 50-year plan.
I think it's about having the conversation with the Australian people.
Who's in there shaping the current government? Who have they got in there who's actually going to be going, hey guys, and I'll talk to some boffins in Treasury, right, who look at spreadsheet, like where are the visionaries in politics? So where is it in the opposition? Does it exist?
This is part of the problem. It's not unique to Australia, but it is, I would say it's exacerbated in Australia. We have a deference to authority and trusting the experts.
Yep. Because all they do is create committees, a committee on a committee on a committee on a committee on a committee. Are they the experts?
But it's also because we have lost our appetite for risk, right? We want the safe option.
Yeah.
Right? If you said to somebody, well, we're going to your point earlier around NDIS rorts. Now, most people wouldn't really have any major issue with the NDIS. Now, most people would automatically jump to the defence of the NDIS if it came out that we were opposition or the government. I can't say the government doing it because it is one of their linchpin issues, saying, well, we're going to cut NDI spending by a quarter, right? They would. I can already see it, and we've seen recently in the past couple of weeks that the government is now heading down a Mediscare style campaign, and it's because. But Australians have become so conditioned to, Medicare's there. That'll save it, right?
Yeah, it's the same notion in the United Kingdom where everyone knows that the NHS is a basket case. It's absolutely broken. The NHS, I think, is the world's third largest employer or something behind the Chinese military and the Chinese railways. It's something ridiculous, hugely like that. And despite over the last 10 years funding increases, it's almost exclusively gone into bureaucratic things. Everyone knows it's broken. The second someone comes in and says, hey, let's review it, Mediscare comes out, the finger pointing, they want to cut our NHS, #save our NHS.
But
it's broken.
This is the point. This around productivity and with NDIS, I think it's a privilege as a country to be able to provide an NDI scheme to people that require it and need it. I think it's brilliant. I'm happy for my taxpayers' money to go into that, which is where we probably spend most of our money, right?
Well, yeah, it's the Social Security. Second or third largest line item as an individual.
As an individual thing. It's when it gets rorted is where you've got productivity problems.
It's getting rorted a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. And the fact that people know,
but they think it's a victimless crime. They go, I'm rorting it, I'm getting this and the other, and then they get found out, and I've got to go to jail, or I get fined. Go, it's theft. Yeah. And it's not normally individuals. It's normally the companies that provide NDI services is riddled with rorters.
Yeah. Hey, Steve, what about maybe you can speak to your people at Anonymous Hotline, so we can start dobbing people in.
At Anonymous Hotline, who's what? At
Anonymous Hotline to dob in NDIS fraud.
Yeah.
That's all we have time for today on the Smart Property Investment Show. But until next time, bye-bye.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.